So where is? So I'm just gonna kind of jump in really quick. Hadn't really planned how I'm going to talk through this that much, but essentially, all that we're really doing is demoing what's been shown before through I think it's Roku like a hurricane. I think put a blog post out quite a while ago about basically piping all your traffic through Charles, sending it on through, and then getting it back. I've made some improvements locally on that. Oh, you need to enable attendee screen share.
One sec. 2 minutes. You should be good now, mate.
Okay. Yeah. So I posted this in the Meetup room. I have a repo up that has pretty much everything I'm going to go through, a running channel with a working example of this. So the main thing that you're going to need to do if you want to get Charles working and you don't want to set up all these actual proxying services or piping stuff from like internet sharing from your Mac as a hotspot and all this other stuff, essentially what you can do is just pipe your traffic out directly to your computer and directly to Charles. And so what it's going to look like is the requests coming to Charles. Let's see if I can make Charles bigger. I don't know if I can. I can't, but I can take this. Essentially, the requests coming out of our app look something like this one here, where they're actually being piped to an IP address. And then essentially all we're doing is using Charles to grab the second half of the request and forward it on to whatever domain for any service you have. One of the main improvements that we've made to our process is we've got a rewrite set up here that does not only the URL, but it'll also do a body rewrite. So when your request comes back, it's going to go through, find all the URLs in your response body, and already pre-pen that proxy information. So if you've got images, you've got addresses to like dash streams or HLS streams, all that stuff is going to have all this already attached to it when it's coming through. So you only really have to worry about the requests going out of your app. And I have the demo here essentially just sends a request to the Fast Workers subreddit. And again, we're doing that rewrite, and all these images, I never had to do anything to them because they've already had, again, that URL already modified. Again, this is kind of hard to talk through, but I just wanted to talk through like the general philosophy of how it's working. I've got the repo up now, which is going to be a really good way for people to come and ask more questions or even improve on what I've done based on Roku like a hurricane. But this is really it. We don't do anything else. The only thing that you can't get with this approach is RAF, really. So if you really need RAF, you're going to have to go the old school route where you're actually injecting certificates into your application, running those through other proxies and things like that, which is something that could be demoed in the future, but that's more of like typing up a whole huge document on how to do that. But the actual code that you need to put in your app is very minimal, so it's not very intrusive. And we have it right now hard-coded in this example, but it'd be pretty easy to have a replacement in here that you run before you sideload your channel, That's what we do. We actually replace this information from environment files and things like that before we sideload it. And then you never have to be worrying about committing IP addresses and conflicting with each other and stuff like that. But that's really all my topic is, short and sweet, and then can be elaborated over Slack or something like that.
Chris, what were you saying about RAF? What doesn't it support with RAF?
It doesn't support RAF. We have an approach where we have to do the certificate inserts that Brian set up. Because we don't, I think there's some URLs generated via that method that we can't intercept. I'm not the RAF guy, so.
But for RAF, you can still feed in VMAPs.
Yes, yeah. There's just some requests coming out of RAF that you won't be able to capture with this.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't break anything. You just might not be able to see that stuff. But everything else, like in the example I have actually in Charles, you can see that I'm actually hitting a dash stream from Reddit and seeing it download and all that other stuff. I can see the playlist and everything else in Charles quite easily. So, yeah, that's really all my topic is.
I've got a question on that, which is, what do you do if, for example, you want to use something like GAMP or a third-party library service? Would it just be a case of, I don't know, just put token literals in, replace them in your build, or just hack the code on the off chance you need that? Because my use case I often have is analytics. I'll end up working on someone's analytics SDK, and then the client will say to me, we really want you to prove out that the analytics are working and show us the actual network traffic. So what would you do if because you're hacking this into your own URL request library, right?
Yeah, so if I actually bring up excuse me, the code example, I'll get rid of all this.
If you use the body rewrite, all URLs inside of the response will point through and pass it through. So as long as there's a clear chain, it goes down. So like we use a lot of like double click stuff, and that's all working right now.
So if those come from a config or something like that as well, that's being pulled in via remote. If you're asking for that config yourself and running it through this, again, like Tyler said, the body's being rewritten. So that's how we actually have our streams working, because all the addresses in our manifests and everything like that. The only ones that don't work, I think, are relative, but it's usually relative to the original request. So again, that original request was to your local machine's IP, which is actually Charles, and then forwarding it on. So those work as well. And in the demo I have, we don't call it like on every poster or anything like that. This is actually the only place. This is the URL proxy function, and it's just for that initial JSON object, and then everything inside is already rewritten. But third-party libraries, it's a little trickier. Unless you can configure that address going into that third-party library, or you can coax them to expose some way to allow them to say, hey, I have a proxy address you need to put in front of it. It's a little challenging. We don't do a lot with third-party, so it's not something I've run into, but I can see the pain point for sure.
Oh yeah, Applicast is the complete opposite. We do everything with third party, so it's the complete converse.
You would still run into the same issue though, even if you want to do the cert approach, because you'd have to still find a way to inject the certs into their URL transfers, and so you're kind of caught with both of them.
Yep. Sweet.
I don't know if anybody else has any other questions on it. Like I said, it's pretty cut and dry, pretty simple. But I'm hoping that since it's up as a repo now, we can clarify the documentation a lot more rather than a blog post that usually just sits there for a long time. If people want to contribute to that repo, go right ahead. If you have a better way to do the rewrites, or if you have other rewrites or things that could benefit, that'd be really good for getting people up and running, I think. I know that I am missing a little bit of documentation in there that I'm going to add explaining how the rewrites work. But, yeah.
Cool. Anyone else got any points or questions on that, or shall we move on and talk about testing and stubbing? I guess we'll just move on. Okay, cool. I'm going to try and share my screen. Let's hope this works. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
sweet. I hope you can see it after I do this. Okay, great. I don't know if it's like legal to not allow, you know, it seems wrong to not allow pop-ups from google.com in 2020. It looks like I can't share it on the big screen, so, or maybe I can. No. Okay, I'm just going to show you here. So you guys should be able to see the slide up here, right? I'm just going to talk through it. So this is about testing strategies that I use at Applicaster that in fact I've used for the last 10 or 12 years of my career. And as you guys know, I adapted Roku's unit testing framework and I made the Rooibos unit testing framework with that as the base. And I'm not like a purist TDD kind of guy, but I take testing really seriously. So there's reasons I take it seriously on Roku, which is, as we know, Roku code's extremely volatile. And even though we've had, you know, some offers from Roku to improve things such as try and catch, the fact is that things will just blow up at runtime. We don't get very good compilation feedback, so that's like a kind of double whammy. So it means as you're working, you might have a bunch of errors in your code, which are going to slow you down in doing your work, but they might also make it into prod and cause a catastrophic crash. And when they happen, there's nothing we can do. And as we know, in many cases, it's very hard for us to ascertain what crash we had and when, and the crash reporting isn't as good as it can be. And the whole point being then is that the real term expense of crashing on Roku is really high. So we have a few options, which is the first one, as we all know, is QA Maximoso. Those of you guys in big companies with large QA departments can just pick up a whole bunch of human beings and just chuck them at your apps, which is wonderful and fair play to you. For a lot of people, that's not an option. And even when it is an option, it's not necessarily the most efficient option. We could do automated testing, and I know some of the guys who are frequently on the Slack group, they have solutions that they provide. I know other people in the community are working on solutions, so that's kind of exciting, but in my mind it solves a different problem. That's more of a QA-centric kind of solution, whereas I'm a developer, so my interest is from my perspective as a day-to-day developer. The other thing that can help us to ensure our quality is high test coverage. That means we have to write about tests. And then I put a section here for additional help, because sometimes we don't realize there are extra things we can do to help us to improve the quality of our code and the overall efficiency of our development work, which is we can use other people's frameworks, because then obviously the code's written, is well tested, is well used, and code you don't write is the best code you can use, in my opinion. You have no maintenance, no invested development time, nothing like that. So you can use things like SGDex. I've got my framework Maestro. I'm sure you guys have got stuff in-house that you use. Then you can use languages that write boilerplate for you. As all of you guys know, the Brighter Script initiative that Bronley's embarking upon, that we work with him on, that helps you to avoid writing boilerplate code. So you're writing Bright Script, but all the kind of stuff that can lead to crashes and wasted cycles, it gets written for you. And in my opinion, the very biggest thing you could do is adhere to software development principles. I must confess, when I came to do Roku work 2 years ago, I don't know how many of you noticed, but the first thing I did was pay some consultants to teach me rapidly, because I was doing some work for a friend. I didn't want to let him down. I wanted to be the best I could and hit the ground running. And the first 2 people I spoke to ended in raging fights on VoIP conferences, where they were telling me basically to copy and paste the same 5-year-old code. And those of you who know me know that that didn't sit very well with me. And I challenged them about their perspectives. But I came into the Roku community and found that, and one of the reasons I started the Slack groups, because I wanted to get together with people who really want to be engineers and really take Roku development seriously. And obviously everyone on this call and all the people in the Slack group, you know, were really lucky to have so many people who are really focused. But I think us guys know, but a lot of other people don't realise that the more you adhere to software development principles, the cleaner your code gets, the more manageable it gets. So let's move on. A question I like to ask people is like, what's your development and testing setup like? Again, I'm a human-centric kind of person when it comes to work. I love technology, but I think we're like film or like movies or space flight, those kind of endeavors that require a lot of people to work together. I think making software is a very complicated thing, needs a lot of human energy, a lot of human connectivity and communication. So I try and think of these kind of subjects like testing, even like mocking and stubbing in those kind of senses of, you know, how does it feel while you're working? You know, like when you're working on your app, do you feel like this? Do you feel like this happens a lot where I live, by the way, just clicking a photo from just down the road, you know, or you get a bug come in. Is that how it feels when you and your mates are working on a bug? You get some kind of issue come up and you need to roll it out into a very specific environment to debug it. Is that how it feels? Is that what you're doing with your components or with your app? You know, I think all of us have been in situations like this. So this is my speciality. I get employed a lot to come and fix these, where this is how people have built and test their apps, you know. So a bunch of ad hoc, completely random practices that don't adhere to any genuine principles, you know. So I show those pictures not to be cute, but I think it has a real human point, which is, you know, we should think about when we're working, how do we feel when we're debugging and writing code, and how much energy do we use in a day, and do we have fun writing new features, or does it leave us tired? Do we end up going home and being moody with our families? You know, can we keep focused while we're working? How productive are we? Like, do we feel good on release day? You know, and I think those are all things we need to ask ourselves before we do anything with testing. So, you know, I try and, as much as possible, I want my work to look like this to outsiders. So if someone comes into my code base and into my software development processes and practices, I want, you know, if you guys were to come and work with me, I'd hope that the codes, the scripts I use, that the patterns I use would provide a lot of very specific and specialized tools that allow one to take components of the application and investigate them in isolation, which is what the point of this is about. And I won't go into this stuff so much. I thought we'd have some other people on the call. Some of them more newbie guys, so I'm not going to bore you guys with this, but that's just to basically say that, you know, we'd expect that our development cycles to be fun and rewarding. But this, I think, is still relevant to everyone here, which is, you know, everyone says testing is painful. You know, going back, there's no two ways about it. Going back and adding tests is a chore, and it's a very painful thing to do. And it doesn't feel like you're actually doing any real work when you're doing that, because if you're adding tests, that means you haven't got enough tests to refactor anything safely. We've all been there. So you can't do anything new and exciting. You can't take advantage of any refactoring opportunities. You just have to write tests just to increase the coverage. So as we know, that happens because a lot of people don't have enough experience in testing, they don't have enough experience with the tools, and they don't know the patterns that they need to use. And so there's a quote, I don't know if you guys like Bruce Lee, the movie Enter the Dragon, but there's this lovely scene where this racist New Zealander is trying to start a fight with Bruce Lee on the boat, and he says, you know, show me your style. And Bruce Lee says, I'll show you over there on that island. My style's the art of fighting without fighting. And I think any good software developer understands that. And so as much as possible, I try to not do things if I can avoid it. And I find that's the best way to do anything, is by not doing. And so let me elaborate on that a bit, which is I don't actually test, I develop. I think some people don't really get that notion at first, because the biggest complaint I hear about testing is that people say, you know, testing's a chore, it takes a lot of time, it's a lot of effort. But I don't actually write any tests. Like, all the apps I work on generally have anywhere between 1,000 and 3,000 tests on them. And I can sincerely say I didn't write any of the tests. I just happened to be developing code, and the tests were the side effects. So, which brings us onto the TDD cycle. So just a quick vote, and I'm not just trying to test if people have gone to sleep, but how many of you are familiar with TDD? I don't know, or it's best to say, is anyone not familiar with TDD? But then no one's going to respond to that either, right? Do you guys, have you guys seen this, the test development?
Yep.
Trims? Okay, cool. And so I work like this, and the reason I want to cover this is it's a few minutes of going into details, but when we get into the nuts and bolts of it, everything will make a lot more sense, you know, so I want to give some context. So the idea is you write a test, it fails, Then you write some code, your test passes, and then you start improving your code. And so I generally write like this all the time. Like I nearly always, I'll actually write the test before I write the code. We'll get on to doing that in a second. But just to be clear that TDD isn't testing. So it's really not, people hear that testing word and they forget their English grammar. You know, it's test-driven development. The noun is the development, the adjective is the test. And so people forget that and they think it's a testing activity. It's absolutely not. And it was kind of intentional reason I put those pictures of the garages and stuff, because I've worked with lots of people in my life, and I've found that the people who are happiest and most successful and work on architectures and applications that make them happy and inspire others are those that don't do things like have to roll out a whole car onto the edge of a small cliff to work on it. They'll just take out the component they want to work on, you know, so they don't have to get under the engine and then contort their bodies with 5 tools for 10 minutes and take the car around the block 5 minutes at a time to see if a bug is fixed. They'll just literally just drop one component out, stick it in a vise and just look at it like that. And so that's kind of how I feel about test-driven development. It's the art of being able to isolate pieces of your code so you can work on them to the point where they're refined enough that, you know, they're fit for purpose, then move on to the next. And so I just want to go back real quick, and there's some things that can help with that. I know some of you use Rooibos, so one of the things I've got, I don't know if you guys have started using some of the scripts I've got, but Rooibos has tests that don't crash. You can stop Rooibos test crashing. So say, for example, you've got an assert that fails and something's invalid, and then the next assert is going to crash because it's looking at a property of an invalid value. The framework actually has allowances to prevent that kind of thing from happening, which makes it very nice to work with. So you always get useful feedback rather than, and very quick feedback rather than a crash stack that's sometimes difficult to understand. You just get, hey, this thing was invalid, text printed out. So, and then there's those of you who use the framework know you can execute specific groups of code. So you can execute the entire test suite, one group of things. So for example, for my login function, or you can execute a very specific test from login function, like login if I've got bad credentials, or there's a lot of levels of granularity, lots of asserts that help us on in scene graph development. And then today what we're going into right now is mocks and stubs. Also we've got code coverage and some other bits like that, which I can go into in some subsequent meetups. So yeah, there we go. I'm just showing off my new logo. I'm happy that I got a logo, so that's my chance to show it to the world. So let's just jump in, because just in case some of you guys don't know how to write Rooibos tests, but I just want to get started on putting tests together around the expectations. So what I've got here, I've got this, I'm just going to jump in here. So I've got, this is generally how I work. So I just want to check first off the bat, is this text big enough for people, or do you need bigger text?
I think it's pretty good.
I can see it.
Okay, cool. Thanks, guys. So let's take a look. So I know sometimes people see my setup and they think I'm absolutely crazy. I work like this nearly all day. So I have my log output here on this side of the screen. That's where my test output is. And then I have my test at the top of the screen here, and I have the thing I'm testing here. So I tend to think of it like a mechanic. Like I don't work on a whole car. I take a component out, put it on my workbench, and I consider Rooibos to be like my set of highly advanced tools that an electrician would use, or a very high-grade mechanic would use to test the components and look at them individually. So I'll generally have one function on screen, and it's very intentional, everything's this size. It means I've got enough space for one function of testing that correlates to one function of code, and on the right here, I've got a bunch of test output. So here I'm just starting to make a demo screen. Now, I'm going to point out a couple of things, but I won't go into too much detail. I know you guys, everyone knows here about using AA classes. So let me just be clear about this. An AA class is where you've got, for example, function. So this kind of thing, you know, you might have a login method, and then that points to a function. That kind of thing, right? So I take it everyone's familiar with like AA classes, right? Because that's a central theme of what we're talking about today. Now, I use BriderScript because I don't like writing all of this boilerplate crap, alluding back to what I said earlier, which is in order to be efficient and to be happy at work and spend my time thinking about the things I want to think about, which are interesting, exciting problems, I don't want to think about typos in boilerplate code. So I have the BriderScript compiler write classes for me, and it does a whole bunch of stuff that I can't do by hand, you know. So that's my first line of testing before I even write any mocks or expectations. This thing's writing tests for me essentially because it runs my code. And in this case, I'm going to make a demo screen class. I'm extending part of Applicaster's framework here, which is a base screen view model. But it doesn't matter. It could be, don't worry too much about what it is, but I can call like a super function. These kind of things give me a whole bunch of object-oriented semantics for free. But a good thing about it is because I'm using BriderScript, I've got some other things as well, like importing. You know, I don't have to write script tags. Just in any given script, I say I import this thing here, and if I step into that thing here, I can see that imports something else and extends another thing. And then if I go into that, I can see that imports these things. And so that's already another level of bugs that are gone because I don't give a crap where I put this anymore. I can put it into any node, and BriderScript will compile it for me, and it will bring up all of the imports for me. It will check if they're valid, check if they're cyclical, missing, etc. And then that does all of that for me. So again, going back to the Bruce Lee art of fighting, well, not fighting, that's the constant theme of what I do. I try and pass off as much work as I can to a computer because that's why we have computers. So in this case, I'm just going to make a screen. We can decide what it does. I think what we could do is say, I hadn't thought about this too much intentionally because I wanted to kind of just shoot from the hip as it goes. What we can do is, you can see here I've got my tests. This is a test suite. For those of you familiar with Rooibos semantics, we have a test suite, then you have a before each section, and then you create groups, right? So the first thing I'll generally do when I test anything is I'll just make sure it makes sense. So I'll generally test the constructor. I use snippets. I'm sure you guys all use a ton of snippets as well. So for example, I've got a test to create it groups, a snippet for it groups. I've got another one to make tests. And then it's very easy for me to make different, you know, cases. In this case, I'm going to test a valid one. So just letting you guys know, this is generally what a test setup of mine would look like. Now, what I will do is this kind of stuff here, I'm just going to highlight, this is the boilerplate you need to get started in Applicaster's framework. So this all happens under the hood, and because I'm writing a test, I have to create this bit. But the thing I actually want to test in my before each is I'm going to test this view model, but it could be any class. It could be a service, it could be a login service, it could be a analytics service, it could be a video filter, whatever you want, you know, but in this case, it just happens to be a view model. So now I've got one of these things, I'll generally write my test like this. And one of the first tests I'll do, I'll just say, you know, I'll just do some kind of sanity thing. So imagine if, for example, I have this thing take a Rivers JSON. I might just test the styles are okay, for example. I might say assert not invalid, m.vm, something like that, just as a sanity check. And then what I'll do is I have keyboard shortcuts set up so I can just slap onlys on various things. So in Rooibos, only means just run this. So if I stick only up here, it's going to run just this test suite. If I stick it on this group, it's going to run this group. If I stick it on this test, it's going to run this test, okay? And then we'll get into the flow of things in a minute, because I know I'm laboring some points, but what I'll generally do is I'll work in 5 to 10 second cycles, depending on the project. Applicaster is a very big project. It's a fully dynamic application that takes JSON payloads and turns them into any kind of app with any kind of views in it. So there's an awful lot of infrastructure. So the test on this is somewhat slower. But here we go. So we can see here, for example, and this is generally how I work. I'm in the process of making Rooibos better integrated with Visual Studio Code, and I'll have that done Q4 this year. But for now, you can see I just ran that one single test, and I can see that my VM styles are not invalid. I'm happy. So now we can start doing some other stuff. So you know what, I'm going to write a function. And again, I prefer using BriderScript because I don't have to add anything to an AE or anything. Okay, so what's something us guys always have to do? We have to do something like a process logging. Let's say this screen's going to do a login for us, and it's going to be a function that takes credentials, okay? And then we've got a function like that, for example. What I would do is I would start here, and I'd say it tests do login. I'd make a test, and I might say do login, and this is going to be the invalid case, invalid items, okay? And so what I'll do is I'll come straight in, I'll think, and this is how I think, well, what does my do login look like? I won't even write the code first. I like to approach it from the outside. So I think about the SDK of it. So I'm like, okay, MVM is it's got a do login method. I suppose it's going to take some creds, right? So then I'll think, well, what do the creds look like? Well, they're going to be some kind of object, you know, so I'll just slap out an object. There you go, there's some creds. That'll do for now. And then what's my login function going to do? Well, it's probably going to call a network task, right? And send some data off somewhere. And so I start thinking like this, and that's where the expectations come in. So what I'll do is, the first thing I'll say is I'm going to expect to have a method called, and it's probably going to be called something, let's say invoke service, and it's probably going to hit some kind of endpoint, my endpoint, and probably going to pass my creds, okay? And I'll just stop for a second, explain what's going on, right? In Rooibos, we have the ability to assert things. So just for those of you on the call that don't know this, you can do things like you can assert a value's empty, dot results. You can assert equality. For example, you could do all kinds of things like you can check a node contains a node, or arrays contain certain elements. So I could say m.vm.items contains that kind of stuff, okay? So these are regular asserts, and what happens is that your test gets run, it executes your asserts, and it gives you the test output here. It tells you what happened if they met the asserts. But we have a whole bunch of other asserts in Rooibos as well, which allow us to expect code to run. Okay, now this is fully documented. So if you go over to Rooibos, you'll see like we got a whole bunch of links. There's documentation and there's API documentation as well. So in the API, in the regular documentation, you can see we've got a section on mocks and stubs. It comes down here, and everything I'm about to talk about is fully documented in here. And there's quite a bit of it, you know. I actually come back here regularly and I find things I've forgotten, and I'm not going to go into everything in great detail today because I could talk about it for a couple of hours. And there's also documentation about there's SDK and API documentation as well. So for example, I'm talking right now about using expect once. We come down here, and you can see everything's documented in terms of the arguments you need to provide and everything. So when we're doing the expect once, we're giving it a target that we want to mock, the method we want to mock, the arguments we expect, and what you can return. And this gives us a real lot of power because it means that we can literally run any part of our app in isolation without having to run the entire app and yet take the entire code for a spin. So in this case, what I'm saying is I'm going to say, I expect my view model class that I made to call the invoke service and to pass in this URL and these creds, and it's not going to give a result because it's going to be an asynchronous call, okay? And then so I expect that to happen, then I call do login, then I'm going to assert some other things, okay? So we'll make sure that the state is loading. So this to me looks like a pretty valid test, okay? I'm going to run it. So let's run that. And I like to work in like 10-second cycles, 5 to 10 seconds, because I find it's just enough time to, like, you know, just let my mind wander and think about the next thing I'm going to do, or perhaps, you know, just jump over to Slack quickly or talk to someone on the team. So in this case, well, that shouldn't, oh, I'm just calling the instructor test. So you see here, you can see the test it run was a constructor. So now let's drop this F3 down to there and rerun. So now we're just going to focus on this one. We're only going to run this. And as we can see, there's no code whatsoever. So what we're going to find is the following. The test is going to run. And you can see none doesn't equal loading. So we can straight away say, okay, well, when we come in here, we want to say m.state is equal loading. Okay, and then I'd have a field in here, say, okay, so we'll do something like that. Don't know if that's going to give me a compiler actually, but let's see what happens. I'm being somewhat contrived. I wouldn't normally go to this level of granularity. I'm just trying to show you guys that these certs are working. So that spins up, bam, and then you can see here, and this is where on the expect stuff is. So you can see I've got a message mock failure on the invoke service, the wrong number of calls. I've got 0 from 1. So look, if you look here, I can click there, take me straight to the line that failed. So there's instructions in documentation explain how to set this up. It's not hard. You just have like one pre-processing task and it insert the line number information that you need to do that. And I find it immensely useful because then I don't have to think. I don't like wasting my time thinking and navigating my code. I just want to click and go straight to whatever I need to focus on. So we can see that wasn't called, and we can see it was not called. Okay, cool. Sorry, I thought someone was saying, hey, we lost you. So what I'll do now is I'll actually call that method. So I say I do invoke service, and I'll say I'm going to invoke the service. And I'm going to call it, I'm going to make an endpoint variable here. Okay. And then what I should do, I should invoke the service with m.endpoint. And then I'm going to change that a bit and say I'm going to add on credentials.username plus credentials. Obviously, I'll do something a bit different here, but I'm trying to keep it as simple for you guys as possible. Okay, so I'm actually going to call the service like that. So I'm going to bundle up my username, my password. If I was to run this, it's going to crash. I can see straight away, well, I'm going to need to put some stuff in, but I'll tell you what, let's just run it anyhow and see what happens. Why not? And so we're going to invoke the service, concatenate our endpoint and our credentials. And we've got a crash there, probably because that's invalid. Yeah, it's because I can't concatenate invalid values. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back and change my data a little bit and just say username is going to be you and password is going to be P. Okay, let's run that. And these to me are legitimate failures. Like this is worth 10 seconds of my life. I don't know about you guys, but I'm happy to do that because I'd rather do it now while I'm thinking about my API than have that happen while I'm running my app. And so you can see here, like now Rooibos has run the code for us, and you can see there's a message mock failure on the invoke service. The first time it was ran, we thought the first argument was going to, we got this. We thought we was going to get this argument here, HTTP endpoint, but what we actually got was this. And so now we can see, okay, well, we're expecting the wrong code. So let's fix that. Actually, in this case, our test is wrong. U is equal to U and password is equal to password, okay? So what's happened here is we are hitting the code in our class and it's going to Rooibos's fake method, and then just like it would in Mocha, Stinon and things like this, obviously not as eloquently as they can because they've got a JavaScript runtime, but you know, we do what we can. It's noting what was different in what we got to what the invocation to the one that we expected. So I'm going to run that again. And we see now that We're expecting this method to be called. And then creds. I think I'm still putting the wrong thing. Yeah, I'm sending the creds argument across as well. So let's take that out. So I'm just, because we can see I'm only going to call it one argument. Okay, so I think that's fair for now. And that's a very basic example of how we can avoid having to call a service directly and avoid integration testing and avoid. I've picked up a couple of apps over the years actually that I've been working on Roku where they stub this kind of stuff and it's not very comfortable to work with and quite time consuming, whereas here it's very easy. And so for example, here we could do a couple of other things as well, because I don't know about you guys, I keep references to tasks. So I might say I expect, you know, I might say m.current task is equal to the invoked service, because under the hood, the service APIs that we use create tasks and things. So what I can do is I want to test my code and make sure I keep a reference to the current task. Now, this expects a return value. When we're doing mock invocations in Rooibos, we can actually set return values. So what I can do, I can actually say, I'm going to create an object, and that's going to be called task. And I can say I'm going to return that from my invoke service, and I can actually make sure it's set. So I can set equal m.v.current task. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to actually, in my code, I'm keeping a reference to the current task so I can cancel it if I navigate away from the screen or whatever. And in my test, I'm creating a mock task object. And in that task object, I'm returning it as a response from this mock method. And then after I execute my code, I'm making sure that I got the reference, I kept a reference to it. So let's run that. And I found that writing in this particular style and being able to do assertions like this saves me an absolute mountain of time. So you can see in that case, I didn't get the message back, invalid doesn't equal task, so vm.current task misspelled. Again, I'm happy to have that. That's a perfectly, as far as I'm concerned, that's worth 10 seconds of my life to double check that. Like I say, when it comes to release date, at the back of my head, there's several hundred of these little mistakes I made during writing tests that give me confidence, you know, because I know that the code was tested. So there's another thing we could do here, which is when we do login, we might want to, for example, call a method, we might call a method that refreshes the view, for example, if we're already logged in. So imagine that we're already logged in, and in that case, there's a possibility that we'd call another function here, which is function show welcome screen, right? This is really contrived, so just bear with me. I'm going to say, I'll just leave it like that for now. Now, what I might say is, this test here, this is a test for, I'll call this valid args now. That test looks good to me. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do another test. I'm going to say this test here is we're already logged in. Okay. So if we go and do login, but we're already logged in, what's going to happen is and this is what I'll do. I won't look at my code yet. I'll think about my test. I'm like, well, what's it going to do? And before I write any code at all, I'll think about my test. And I think, well, I don't think it's going to call that. So in Rooibos, I can say I expect none. I don't expect you to invoke that as service at all. So let's get rid of that. I don't think it's going to call that. But what I do expect it to do is it will call the show welcome screen method with no args, okay? And then I'll change these things as well. And I don't know if you guys can see this, but what's happening is I'm able to make pretty big, I'm able to think pretty broadly about my code without actually having to write any code. And I've found over the years that leads me to a place where I tend to write cleaner code because my thoughts aren't getting polluted and bogged down by the intricacies and fine-grained details of the syntax of the code I write. I'm thinking more abstractly. So here I'm kind of almost thinking in pseudocode in some way. The test ends up becoming an aid to my thinking process. I'm going to say, well, if I'm going to do a login and I'm already logged in, then in that case, I don't think I'm going to invoke any services. I'll probably call a welcome screen method, probably not going to be in loading state. I'll go one better than that. I'll say I should be in logged in state, and I won't have a loading task. Okay, so let's run that. And again, it's like I said, it's just enough time. It's just, you know, 5-10 seconds, just kind of having to think about what I'm doing. Like, and at this point, sometimes I might have a really big realization, like, man, I'm doing this so completely wrong. But I just find there's enough breathing space, and because I'm not going back and forth to an app and following a happy path, this is what I expect because there's no logic here. So then let's put some logic in here. I'm going to put something in to say m.vm dot something to say we're logged in. You know, is logged in. So let's put a flag there. It's can try, but and then we can put some kind of tests in here. So if m dot is logged in. In that case, we're going to say m.state ready, and we're going to do m show log welcome screen. Okay, so let's give that a go. Okay, I thought it'd be, you can see the failure I got, I thought it'd be ready, logged in, but let's call it ready, okay. So, and that as well, I kind of jam back and forth between my thoughts and the implementation. So on this side, it's almost like, this side is like my thinking about what I'm gonna do. And then you can see the difference in your mentality as you're in the code, you know, like even the kind of state names I use are gonna be more kind of rigid, left brain, kind of, thoughts. So I really like to work like this because it keeps me out of getting too caught up in small things. So is that clear so far? Because I wanted to cover one last thing, if that's cool with everybody.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, one last thing I wanted to cover, which is because I know some people don't really use our AD on Roku, like go for a more functional style. I always think it's the best of all worlds, you know, like I use functional programming and object-oriented programming as well, but there's some other things you could do with expectations that are really handy. So say, for example, we're going to go and write another, we're happy that this thing works now, so we'll give one last test. What we'll do, we'll step out, test the entire, do login, just make sure we didn't regress anything, right? So we're going to run this entire it group, just to make sure we didn't break anything when we added that small refactoring to give us the ability to handle the case when the user's already logged in. And we did break something in the test. That to me, for example, if you saw what just happened there, I've got a crash there. That would actually lead me to go up here and go, do you know what? I'm going to add a property of a default value. And in doing so, my code is becoming stronger and more resilient. So even a small thing like that, I never look at these and go, oh, shit. I look at something like that and go, great, that just reminded me I needed to set initial value for that property, because now my code's more resilient. So the more I'm taking it for a drive in my tests while I'm writing my code, I'm building up like this regression suite. Now I've got, you know, there you go, 2 unit tests. Oftentimes I'll spend an hour writing something, about 20, 30 tests by the end of that hour. And those tests weren't for the sake of writing tests, they were just to write the services like you're seeing now. And then your regression test suite just grows over time really quickly. So I want to do one last thing as well, because I want to show how you can match expecting callbacks in Rooibos with parameterized testing. Gosh, that's a mouthful. So let's do another it group. I'm going to call this process on login result. Okay, so let's add a test. And we're going to call this failures. So we're going to expect a function to exist which will take a result. I don't know what the result is yet, but I know it's going to do that. And then I guess what we want to do is, if it fails, then we're probably not going to call this show welcome screen function, is my guess. So it wouldn't fail. I don't expect that to be called. And I probably would expect us to show an error screen. So maybe I'll say expect once. And then we'll keep it nice and simple and try for now. So if I run that, it's going to fail because I don't have that function anywhere. So let's just quickly add that function. Okay. And we'll run that. I'm going to run just this one test. And again, I just want to point out, you don't need to use script to do this. I use script because I just don't want to write a whole bunch of boilerplate code. And I want more coding assistance because script gives us namespaces. You get better code assistance because not all your you don't have to prefix all your function names. So if I take a look at all of the methods in my app, I get real names that read like real code. You know, so that's what there's none of that silly prefixing stuff all over the place. So that's the reason I use it, but you don't have to. This system of mocks and stuff works with AA classes completely fine. I did try and think of ways to make it work with nodes. If anyone on this call has got some ideas, feel free to hit me up. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. So in this case, I'm getting a mock failure because I'm not showing the error screen, and it's because I've not written any code. So the first thing I'll do here with something like this, I'll always do something like this. I actually go params, and this gives us the ability to write parameterized testing. I know some of you guys are doing this already. And so I think, what am I going to pass in? Well, I think that result object. At the moment I'm passing undefined, that was silly. So I might see what happens if I send invalid. I might have some ideas of what responses I can get. I might have a user is invalid. Perhaps I'm working to a Jira ticket and it's giving me some very specific user codes, you know, or error codes. So I might be able to go and put those in, you know. And I can take things from my Jira ticket and put them in there. And now I've got, you know, 6 or 7 different tests that I can go in. That's going to give this code a bit of a spin. So now bearing in mind, and this is helping me write my method again now, I go back to my method and I've got this here. And before I write any code, I'm already thinking of the kinds of values I'm going to need to process. So first off the bat, I might say, well, you know, if nu.get content field, it's a function we have, you guys all got the same things. User invalid. So if we've got an invalid user back from a result, then I'll say okay, so I'm going to get a login result. I show my error screen when I have no user there, and we give that a go and see what happens. So we don't expect it's going to show the welcome screen. And you see, I've already got a whole bunch of passes there. And I know a whole bunch of you guys are obviously testing and whatnot, but once you start putting these expects together with parameterized testing, I'm not actually doing it here, but I could do for the credentials, for example. I could do login, I could pass in a whole bunch of invalid credential scenarios, you know, where the username's not set and the password's set, etc. You can end up getting a whole bunch of tests, like really driving a whole bunch of your code really quickly. Very last thing on this, and this really is the very last one, is that one of the things that we use extensively in Applicaster is inversion of control. And again, when I came to start doing Roku development, a lot of people told me you can't do base classes, you can't do overriding methods, you can't do version of control, you can't do OAD because the machines are too slow. But our framework's just gotten faster and faster the more that we're doing these things. So we have a way of doing things. I'm just going to jump over to the reg code login screen, for example. So let me just pull this up here. This is a VM that we have. And you can see we got these get instance methods here. And that gets us an instance of any kind of node or primitive object that can cross node boundaries. So all of our kind of managers like analytics managers or plugin managers, the current selection someone's made, because we track current selection objects, I'm sure you guys do, where you got a selection, where it came from, what kind of selection it was, which aids in playing collections and analytics, etc. So what we do is we actually have methods available called get instance, and we can just tell it what we want and it will give us it. And we can get classes like that as well. So you see we've got this get class instance. If I need a plugin manager, that's something we use in Applicaster for the various plugins that we have for different screens and such like. And the thing is, you can actually stub these in the same way you can stub the other functions I showed you. So I just want to show this really quickly, because once you start doing this, it's pretty meta and it really gives you a lot of power. So if I look in here for, you can see this is a test for the load method and when it's showing, right? And you can see I've got this get instance mock here. And so I'm saying when the code to, let's go and find load method in here. Right, so you see here, you've got the current selection here. It comes from our IOC. And you can see in the test here, I've got a bunch of cases. So when it's not showing, I can actually tell it what current selection object I want it to show. And I can actually, I don't know if it's showing it here, I had an example. Yeah, so I can actually get, for example, my analytics manager. That can come back from a method which is stubbed, and then I can stub the result of that. And oftentimes I find a lot of people have a real nightmare of their code because they have to insert the correct values into places to get the states that they need, or create all kinds of crazy machinery to do things where what I can do, say for example, I just want to get, I don't know if I've got entitlements in here. 1 second. Okay. Don't know if I've got a unit test that's showing this in this project. Crap, no, I don't. Maybe we've got one of those. One sec. Sorry, I had one of these set up for you guys and I lost it. No. Okay, I'll just show you here. But say, for example, I want to call a method on this current selection object, right? I can actually get something out of my IOC. So let's just focus on this bit here. And then say, for example, I'm going to do current selection, got a call func, is selection valid, right. That could be kind of painful to test sometimes, but what I can do here, I can do something like, and then I can expect that to be called on MVM on my view model, or it could be called anything, it could be manager, for example, doesn't matter. And that's going to be get instance. So and then I'm going to call func on that, and is selection valid, and I'm going to return true. And to give you some kind of idea, Okay, so in just a couple of lines of code, we can take something like this that's pretty hard to work with, and using IOC, and all get instances is just a wrapper for a namespaced function, which is get instance. In brighter script, it looks like this. Again, that gets you the proper code completion. But so you get a function like that. Excuse me. And I'm jumping around a lot, so apologies for that. So I can get something out of my inversion of control. I can say exactly what instance of it I want to return, and then I can actually stub function calls on that thing as well. And once you start doing things like speaking to auth managers, entitlements managers, analytics, and all manner of things like that, this becomes a very, very quick and handy way to work. So just want to make that clear. I don't want to overrun too much. And there's so much more we can cover on Rooibos. So I just want to show you guys, if you're not using the expect functionality yet, you can find documentation about it here. I'll post it up after this chat, linked specifically to it. So there's a whole section of documentation here. And I've only really just scratched the surface. I think, honestly, I could spend a very long time talking about how to use mocks and stubs to be hyper efficient in your development. But you guys can go and read up on it, and I'll probably record some fresh YouTube videos for this stuff in the future. And with that, I think I shall somehow stop the screen presentation. How do I do that?
I think you already did, actually, by mistake somehow.
Okay, cool. There we go. So I think I know that's a lot of information. Unfortunately, I don't know if anyone's got any questions, but I just killed everyone with expect and stub overload. But if anyone's got any questions, you can always just PM me or write in the Rooibos channel to see how to do that.
You mentioned having tests that won't crash or like that. And I think maybe we've talked about this before, but the way I've always handled that is checking the result of the assert or like that. Is that basically the way you expect somebody to avoid it crashing, or is there something else we're not
Oh yeah,
doing?
but you wouldn't write that. I mean, you'd be nuts to write it. What you can do, you can use a tool like Orc or like Gulp.
That's right. That's what it was. That's right. You were saying that basically use a preprocessor to build those in for you.
Yeah, yep. Just stick the line of code in there. So the good thing is I expose that in the unit test framework, so it's there, so you can take advantage of that. I suggest you do it if you don't, because it's a real time killer. You know, you just hit something and bam, okay, what went wrong? Is especially if do you guys use any of the hyperlinks in the VS Code IDE's logging? So you can click and go straight to
Not yet. We have to build that into our preprocessor.
Okay, because again, I've got Orc examples, Gulp examples, but it's really trivial to do. It's such a time saver, man. Like you can see anything happens, I just click and bam, I'm exactly where I want to be.
I had them in our in the old app I used to work on. We have a completely custom build pipeline, so we have to build it into our own pipeline essentially. But it's not that bad to do.
It's the same thing as the, like you said, I turned my screen sharing off, so I don't know how I did that, but there's in the Gulp file that ships with Rooibos have got examples of how to do that. So I'll point those, I'll put those up as well on the community GitHub. I'll just put a link to that stuff. Yeah. So I think I'm probably the only person who's doing hardcore OOAD on Roku, right? I think just about everyone's functional, yeah. Like people don't really do classes, no?
We kind of do, but node based. I don't know a lot of people that I've worked with that do AA classes, which makes it a little tricky because mocking and stuff like that is of course much harder in node classes. But writing AA classes was so hard to look at that we were just like, no.
Yeah, well, that's why, that's how Bron and me started talking about language, because I just refused to do it. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to work like this. So I started writing my own language for that very reason. But in Brighter Script, it's really a cinch, and it's very easy because you've got the import packages and you can import the scripts for any given class. it makes it an absolute no-brainer to not do it. But there's no reason why you wouldn't, because making them's easy, importing them's easy. You just import the one farm, bam, you got everything for free. So hopefully over the coming months, people will get more interested in that particular style. Because like you say, it's not possible to mock nodes. And to me, mocking and stubbing is such a big productivity boost. If you're purely functional, I think you guys are way more functional and life's a lot easier. But I keep picking up code bases that are in the middle and they're just torture to work with. You know, like if you're functional, great, you pass in args for everything, who cares? But yeah, but I'll post those up. I think, is there anything else anyone needs from me? Because I just see my missus just walk in. So I think we're going to go and play a board game and all that kind of good stuff.
I think we're good. I certainly don't have anything else.
Okay, cool. Well, in that case, guys, I think what we'll do, I don't know if we should do this time next month or 1 hour later, I'm thinking. I think this maybe was a little too early. So I'll speak to the guys in Europe and see what they want to do. I'm really hoping we can get something a bit more left field next month. I don't know about you guys. I'd love to know about Roku game development. So I'm kind of hoping that Jay Cavallo will come and speak about that kind of stuff. But let's see, Chris, what we can drum up for next month. If any of you guys want to present anything, but I think it'd be nice to get some kind of funkier topics, expand our horizons a bit. Okay, guys, I'm going to chip. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it, George.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, George.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, George.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.